first thing we're going to be doing today is getting this truck jacked up in the air, obviously get some jack stands underneath it, and then we're going to get the wheels and tires off that. So let's get that done right now. Alrighty, so the next thing we're going to be doing is, on a truck this old, I like to come in with a little bit of penetrant. This is silicone. I get it off Amazon. But basically, all I'm going to do is go around all the components that I'm going to be disassembling, which is going to be shocks, ball joints, tie rods, stuff like that. I'm going to hit a little bit with this. That'll just make life a little bit easier, especially on an older vehicle like this, because chances are this stuff has not been apart for many, many years. So just going to hit all this real quick, and then we'll get into disassembly. So our first component that I'm going to be removing is going to be our old shock. I'm going to be getting rid of that anyway because we do have new shocks over there. So new shock's going to be the first thing. Then we'll probably work on getting the brakes off this, because I am going to end up changing the pads in this and also our rotor, because it's heavily grooved from just sitting so long and it's pretty rusty in there. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to be taking loose is this top stud and then moving down here to the lower section. Alrighty, now that those are off, we can move on to disassembling tie rod and also go ahead and get our brake rotor out of the way. So the first step to removing this tie rod is going to be getting our cotter pin out of the castle nut and stud. So you just want to twist around on this thing until you get these two strands in line with each other. That way you can pull this thing straight out. Everything on this older truck has really fought me, so don't be surprised if you're messing with one of these old trucks if you don't run into the same problems. On an older cotter pin like this one, chances are you're going to have to replace it, so just go ahead and grab yourself just an assortment. Places like Harbor Freight have plenty of this stuff. Alright, now that that's removed, you can fit your socket on here and hopefully break it free. Alright, now that we've got our nut almost all the way to the bottom of the stud here, I like to go ahead and just tap up on that, just separating that taper joint there. So just give it a couple taps. Just give it a couple taps. Also, you can use a pickle fork to come in here, but it sometimes tears up that boot, so I like to not do that unless I absolutely have to, which we may need to this time. There it goes. Alright, finish backing your nut off here. And we're spinning inside of the nut. Alright, now that that's free, it doesn't look like we really needed to worry about ripping the boot, because it looks like somebody already has. So tie rod aside now, let's move on to getting our brake all removed. And if your brakes are good on your pickup, chances are you can skip this step by just breaking free the upper ball joint, laying everything over. Just a quick little tip that I like to do while I'm doing this kind of stuff so you don't lose stuff. If you're going to be utilizing nuts and bolts again, just try to get those things put together at least. That way whenever you get ready to come back, everything's there. You're not hunting underneath the truck and everything for a nut or wash. So the first thing we're going to be doing is taking our two caliper bolts out here, and then that's going to allow us to offset our brake caliper here. Then we can get our rotor off and all that good stuff. Alright, I'm going to make sure I take these and clean these up so they can slide a little bit better, because that's part of our problem, probably why these things are wanting to lock up and stick. So she was about ready for some pads. So the same thing, just as we did on the tie rod, we had to remove this cotter key in here from our upper ball joint, and then that way we can let that down. Also, before we get into it too far, I do want to say, before you loosen this all the way, you're going to want to get a jack underneath your lower control arm. That way that spring pressure doesn't kick everything out on you. So I'm just going to get this thing started right now, get this out, and then that way everything can kind of stay where it needs to just while I get this broke free. All right, now that that's removed, we're gonna take our 7/8 socket here, fit it up on here, and try to get this thing broke loose. Like I was saying, make sure you do not back this all the way off. I mean, get it to where it's pretty free and everything. That way you can get it off after you break this ball joint. But now we're gonna roll our jack up underneath our lower control arm. That way it's supporting this spring and nothing wants to go flying out of here. Alrighty, now that we have our jack supporting up underneath of our lower control arm, we can go ahead and remove that nut just a little bit further down and go ahead and try to split this joint, which makes up for your upper ball joint. And I've kind of misplaced my pickle fork, which is just a tool you pop in here. I don't know where the heck it's at, so I'm basically just going to try to get a pry bar in here and maybe tap down on this spindle in a couple places, and then also up on this control arm, just trying to break that taper. Because what your ball joint is, it's a taper fit that goes down inside of a tapered hole. So the tighter it gets, the tighter your fit gets. So the more that nut gets pulled down in there, the more that taper gets down in there. Basically, by popping up on that, you're splitting that taper, and that's when you get that big pop and everything like that. That's what that is. Let's try to get this taper fit broke loose, and hopefully it doesn't take too much. Also, during this part, you want to make sure you keep your fingers out of the way of that spring. I learned that the hard way back in high school, and a spring was kind of cocked in there, and my dumb butt tried to throw that thing in there with my hand, and it kicked. And I'm not kidding you, that finger right there is still, the fingernail on it's still not right today. So just make sure you keep your hands free of that spring, because it can bite you, and it can bite you quick. Alrighty, so now that we got our nut off, let's see if we can't pop this thing up. Do just a little bit more hunting real quick for that pickle fork, because that's what we need in this kind of a situation. So I'll be right back with you. I didn't have any luck, but I did find my bigger pry bar, so let's see if we can't get that in there. Shoo, buddy. There it went. Hopefully you can see that on camera. It finally went. It's not really ideal to, you know, hammer on that nut, but in a tight spot where I don't have my pickle fork apparently, it's my only means. Let's back this nut the rest of the way off now, and hopefully we can get this thing separated. Alright, just double check to make sure. Oh yeah, we're free now. You know, drop that down out of the way. So let's get this thing dropped down. I'll move you guys just so it doesn't kick out and kill my phone if something happens, and then I'm going to be on this side of the vehicle. Alright, so what you're going to do next is just start slowly dropping down on your jack here, creep off of it, and allow that spring pressure to kind of come to zero. You can see everything's kind of zeroed out on the pressure, but still, don't go sticking your hand in there. Get you a long pry bar, a piece of wood, or whatever the heck you got laying around. Make sure. You can see that spring though is not loaded up anymore, so we're good to take this jack the rest of the way out now and get in there and remove our old spring. Alright, so just like everything else on Dad's pickup, everything is coming out in parts. So as you can see here, the coil spring probably needed replaced on this old truck, because I don't know what they were doing with this old truck, if they were, you know, rally crossing it, jumping it. Maybe it was a tough truck challenge or something, but every suspension component on this truck has been broke. It's really odd, I don't understand it, but nonetheless, we got everything we need. So I'm just gonna spend a couple seconds here scraping around, cleaning all this stuff up. Then we'll get over here, I'll show you guys the new spring, get them installed. Alright, so with our new coil here, it's quite a bit shorter than our old coil, which obviously it's going to have to be, I guess, to be a 3-inch drop coil, but excited to see what this whole thing looks like, but let's get it back in the truck. Okay, so I'm just going to feed this new spring up through here, and on these springs, there is a spot here that is going to need to meet back here on your A-arm, and it's all made just for that. So you're going to take that back, and then make sure you come in here and get that sitting where it needs to. What we're gonna need to do is get our jack back underneath the lower A-arm first. That way we can start bringing this thing up. Alright, so now, before we get too crazy and carried away, let's go ahead and get our upper ball joint reinstalled. And reinstall our nut. Go ahead, I like to tap these down a little bit. Just kind of seats that taper joint that I was telling you about earlier, and we'll tighten this thing down. Alright, the only thing you want to really make sure of when you're tightening this, obviously you want it tight enough, but there's also that cotter pin that has to go back in there, so you want to line that up. So we're going to have to go just a little bit further. Alright, and I'm going to go grab a new cotter pin, throw it in there, and then we'll be looking at reinstalling a shock. Alrighty, so our last step is going to be installing our shock here. These are from CPP, which I think is Classic Performance Part. These are for the 63 to 87 C10 front. So these are for a drop shock. These are quite a bit smaller. And as you can see here, it does say the direction on here is going to be, this is going to be our top. So what we're going to do is slide that on there like so. Put our washer back on, and also our nut. After that is just go ahead and take this off and direct it down into this part. If it's hard to see on the camera, I'll get you in here in a minute. So it gets a little bit tight right there. So what I'm gonna have to do here, this is pretty tight for this bushing. See how that's not wanting to go in very well? What I'm gonna have to do is just pry that open just a little bit with an adjustable real quick. Not gonna go too much. Just enough to make that thing go in there. Also, this lower one is going to need that bushing installed too. So the kit comes with two different bushings here that are going to be inside your shock. Obviously this one can be too small, but that one's just right. So let's put that inside of our shock real quick. That way whenever we get this thing in, we can just slide the bolt through. And doing this outside of the vehicle would probably be a lot smarter. So learn from my mistake and do it the right way the first time. Because you can throw this in a vise and be done with it. But we'll just throw this old C-clamp on here. It won't take long at all. Alrighty, there it is. So I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on this thing. We should be good to go. Alrighty. I'm probably going to remove this sticker. I said I was going to remove this sticker. Alright, I'm probably going to leave that sticker. Get over here to the other side and get our tie rod hooked up. Alright, so our last step is going to be getting this tie rod hooked back up to our spindle, and then we will have this driver or passenger side all the way done. Alrighty, so we're spinning, so I'm going to try to tap down lightly on the top of this tie rod to get that to seat down in there. Hey, watch out. Alrighty, so we're still spinning here. Could be castle nut being a little marred up, so let me pop that off and we'll take a look at that. Yeah, so it looked like where I tapped right here, it's messed up a couple of these, so I'm just going to take a file in between here, clean those up real quick, and we'll see what we got. Alrighty, so I just ended up running this nut here down a tap. Basically, like I was saying, all of these where I'd hammered that off because I didn't have my pickle fork, it was kind of marred up on there. So let's see if we can't get this thing on now. Alrighty, also I went ahead and brought a new cotter pin over here. Put that in there and wrapped it around. Alrighty, so this side is completely done. I'm gonna jump to the other side and run through that, and then we'll get this thing back on the ground. Alrighty, so one of our last things looks like we're gonna have to do here is trim our bump stop, because when we're allowing the truck to come down, it is just pretty much primarily hitting on our bump stop here. So what I'm gonna do is just bring the Sawzall in and just cut that roughly in half, and hopefully that'll get us enough travel. I did go with the wood blade variety. Hopefully that'll work on rubber. Alrighty, I'm going to run to the other side and do it, and let's see if it'll lower down then. Alrighty, so we've got a little bit of space in between our bump stops. Hopefully you can see that in between our pad and the actual bump stop itself, so that should allow everything to be pretty kosher and all that good stuff. So that's going to wrap this one up. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, go ahead and hit that like button down below. And also, there's a video on the flip kit. I'll leave a link down in the description below so you can watch that as well. But Dad's truck's sitting 3 inches lower in the front, 5 in the rear, so we'll see you on the next one.